Good morning, Aurora. Welcome back to Quarantine Coffee and Jesus. This week we have been looking at the miracles that Jesus performed during his 3 years of ministry, and it's been really sweet. But when we first decided to go through these miracles, I'll be honest, I think like a part of me wasn't as excited or thought like, should we do something else? Or I was just hesitant. I think I thought like everyone knows about these miracles, like everyone knows the story of this or that. Like we learned those in Sunday school. Like what new stuff could we like get from that or get from those stories? Or like some of these miracles like are weird. Maybe that's just me, but sometimes I read some of these and like they're just weird. They remind me of like Harry Potter or just like weird sorcery stuff. And maybe that's wrong to say, but side note, I'm like, so if you know me, I'm not into like fantasy like books or movies or anything or sci-fi. So I'm not into Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or stuff like that. I don't know if those are all like in the same category, but I'm not into it. Don't try and change my mind. Don't at me. It is what it is. Anyways, after listening to everyone teach this week on the miracles, like I can confidently say I was wrong. I was really wrong about what these miracles could teach us. It's been so good for me. It's taught me so much about God's character, like who he is, and not just like what he does, but who he actually is. And as I studied what we're going to look at today, I was just in awe of like the type of man that Jesus was, right? He was a man. He was fully God and fully man. And the type of man that he was just was like such a beautiful reflection of God during those 3 years of his ministry on earth. So today I'm looking at the miracle where Jesus feeds the 5,000. It's actually the only miracle that's found in all 4 Gospels, which is pretty cool. So we get kind of 4 different perspectives, 4 different accounts of what happened. And they all added a little bit of cool detail that we'll dive into. So I'm going to read the account from Matthew, but then I'm going to be like bringing in some parts from the other Gospels, Mark, Luke, and John, that really added like some good perspective and some good like stuff to think through. So read with me. We're in Matthew 14, starting with verse 13, and we'll go all the way through verse 21. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. The first thing it says in verse 13 is when Jesus heard this. So what are they talking about? When Jesus heard what? So if we go back to the beginning of chapter 14, we learn that Jesus has just found out that his best friend, John the Baptist, the guy who baptized Jesus, the guy who was considered to be like the forerunner or the precursor to Jesus, and just a really important man in Jesus's life, has just been beheaded and killed. And so that's what it's saying. Now when Jesus heard this, that's what it's talking about. He's just found out that his best friend has died. Think about that. Like we all know exactly where we were and when it was that we found out horribly tragic news. Maybe that's been recently for you. but you remember where you were when you found out that someone you love or cared about was sick or had died. And that's the headspace that we find Jesus in when this whole story begins. And so Jesus gets in a boat with his disciples, and he wants to get away to a quiet place to be alone, right? Like, wouldn't you? I'm a major isolator anyways, like normally, but especially when I'm grieving or hurting in some way, like I just want space. I just want to be alone. And that's what Jesus does. That's what he wants to do. So he gets in a boat with his buddies and he's like, let's just go somewhere. Let's get off to be somewhere alone. But the people in the area, in that town, found out where he was going. And they know that this guy has been performing miracles and doing some really crazy stuff. And maybe they all have like some questions for him. So they run and tell everybody in the towns nearby where he's going, and they rush and they beat him there. Like, not beat him, they get there before he does. And so as Jesus and the disciples are pulling up to this spot where they thought they would find peace and rest and solitude, instead they find a large crowd of at least 5,000 people waiting for Jesus on the shore. Side note, you guys, I watch a lot of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Don't at me. Do not. Just, everyone has their flaws. This is my one flaw. I watch a lot of Keeping Up with Kardashians. So my mind immediately went to thinking about how like celebrities or the Kardashians, they'll plan a secret trip or a private vacation to be alone. But the paparazzi always finds out that, like, somehow, and they're posted up with their cameras waiting for them to like get off the plane. Like the paparazzi are there before they are. So they get the like really unflattering bikini pictures, or they get the like faces of surprise celebrities because they didn't know that they would be there. Anyways, that's where my mind goes. All that to say is I'd be so pissed off if I wanted to be alone and was grieving and a whole bunch of people followed me. But thank goodness I'm not Jesus, because when he sees the crowd, instead of being annoyed or inconvenienced like I would be, we're told that he's moved with compassion for these people, right? So he comes here to find quiet and solitude because his friend has just passed away. And instead he found a crowd of people wanting something from him. They weren't there to comfort him, to see what he needed. They wanted something from him. And his heart only wants to help them and meet their needs. And so his compassion in the middle of his own suffering is like incredible. It's unhuman to feel that way, I think. So he gets right to work. He starts healing their sick, and he spends his whole day doing that. Mark's version says that Jesus began to teach them many things. And then Luke's version says he spoke to them about the kingdom of God and cured those who had need of healing. And so that order of things really stood out to me, because it says he taught them the kingdom of God and then cured those who had need of healing, right? Because Johanna talked about this yesterday, but Jesus's priority is our spiritual healing before our physical healing. He knows what we need physically, and he knows that he could do that, but he also knows that that's temporary, and that's not ultimately the most important thing. So he feeds them the word of God, and then he'll feed their bodies. So he does this all day, and then once evening hits, the disciples, who I'm sure are tired and hungry because they've been there with him, like working and helping him, they say, all right, Jesus, it's getting late. These people are hungry, and we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no restaurants anywhere nearby. There aren't any drive-thrus. So I think it's time to like send these people away, let them go buy their own food, and let's get on with it. But Jesus said, and I love the contrast that you like see in scripture where it's like, this person said, but Jesus said, because they're so different. But Jesus said, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. And in Mark, their response in Mark is so like sassy and sarcastic, because they say, oh, okay, so should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Or, and they're giving Jesus some food here. 200 denarii was about 6 to 7 months worth of wages, which they obviously didn't have. So they're tired and they're hungry. They're hangry, if you will. So their patience was getting really short. That's kind of why we're seeing this attitude come out. Side note, the account in John, if you read it in John, tells this part of the story a little differently, and I actually really like it. So we're going to look at this part right now. So it actually says in John that Jesus saw the crowd. So he sees them on the shore and teaches them and does all that. He essentially saw their need, right? He knew their need before they knew it. He knew that they were going to be hungry and be there all day. So he looks at Philip, who's one of the disciples, and he says, where are we to buy bread so that these people can eat? He's asking Philip this, and he's testing Philip because Jesus already knows what he's going to do and how he's going to provide for these people. But that's the thing about Jesus. He isn't a genie, and he wants to teach us something in the process. Even though he could just snap his fingers and fix, heal, provide, or do whatever is needed, he's going to teach the disciples in the midst of the miracle. So Philip's initial answer... I'm sorry. Hold, please. Annie girl. No. No, Annie girl. It's UPS and she hates UPS. Be right back. And we're back. Pardon the interruption. She hates the mail. It's a specific mail truck that she hates. And that's who just arrived. Anyway, so Philip's initial answer to Jesus asking him, like, hey, do you know where we could go buy bread to feed them? His initial answer is 200 denarii worth of bread would not even be enough for each of these people to have a little bit, right? So he's saying, we don't have enough to take care of everybody. And remember that Philip has been with Jesus for a while now, right? He's been traveling with him. He's seen the miracles that Jesus has performed. All of the disciples have seen Jesus. You guys, this is real life. If anyone's in need of a dog, she's great. Cole's going to make a comment about her barking because I say that she never barks. And of course, she has to show herself today. Okay, so all of the disciples have seen Jesus heal tons of people and do some crazy things, right? They know what Jesus is capable of. But in this moment, they forget. Philip takes his focus off of what God can do, and he's focusing on what they don't have right now. And he stops believing for a miracle. And I'll be honest, I am a lot like Philip. Like, I am Philip. I always think about how things go wrong. I'm a 6 on the Enneagram. If you know the Enneagram, what up to all my 6s? But I'm always thinking about how things can go wrong, or worst case scenarios, or why something won't work. And I oftentimes feel overwhelmed, like, by the needs of the people around me, or in the community, or in our state, or in the world. I feel overwhelmed just thinking about it right now. And I've thought, like, I can't possibly do enough to help everyone who needs help with my limited time and money and knowledge. So Philip, and a lot of times we think in terms of money, right? Like, how much is it going to take to carry out God's plan or what God's asking me to do? And how often do we leave God out of the equation when we're trying to carry out his own plan? Like, we do that all the time. It's hilarious. So Jesus asked them, what do you have? What do you have right now? Right? He takes his focus off of what they don't have, asks them what they do have. And this is what he does. Like, he asks us to participate in what he's about to do. Even when we doubt him and give him sass, he's still willing and wants to partner with us. So they tell him that a little boy, in one of the accounts, the account in John, is the only account that mentions this little boy that I think we've all heard of. that a little boy in the crowd has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. I imagine the boy looking back at them like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, this is my lunch. Like, I packed my lunch today. I don't know what you guys were doing, but I packed my lunch. Like, this is for me. And I didn't really plan on sharing it with 5,000 of my closest friends. And barley loaves were like the poor man's bread. So it was a much lesser grain than wheat. And then the word they use here for fish indicates more of like a dried salted fish, like maybe sardines or something, that would be used as like a spread on the barley loaves. So it's not like too, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to use that word. Too large fish. It is too little like sardines. But Jesus tells them to bring it to him and to gather all the people to sit down on the grass. And so I wonder if at this point his disciples are like rolling their eyes like, okay, like it's going to feed 10 people and then we're done, and like doubting him, or if they're more like, oh shoot, here we go, here Jesus goes, he's about to do his thing, like he's going to do something dope. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But in all 4 Gospels, we see Jesus take the few bread loaves and the fish, and it says that he looks up to heaven and he gives thanks and blesses the food. We cannot miss that, right? Jesus is thanking God for the little bit that they do have, and he gives thanks before the miracle happens. Like, I wrote that and I circled it, like giving thanks before the miracle. He is that confident that his Father will provide before it happens, because he's seen his Father, he's seen God do this before and provide before, right? Like, this is a bit of a, not a foreshadowing. What is it when you like look back? Anyway, remember when they were like wandering in the desert and Moses like prays down manna for the people, right? Like Jesus knows, he looks back at what God has done in lives before, maybe not his, but in other lives before. He's like, I know that that's my God, and he has done it before, and I believe he'll do it again. So he's thanking God before all of that. And I think through all of this studying of miracles this week, this is what we keep seeing. It's a faith that believes before it happens. Yesterday, the friends that brought their friend through the roof, they believed before it happened. The woman who like fights through the crowd to touch like just a little part of the fabric of the thing that Jesus was wearing, like she believed enough to fight through there before it happened. And that is like what keeps sticking out to me, and that's the definition of faith, right? Believing before you've seen it or before it's happened. So after he thanks God for what he has provided, he breaks the food into pieces and he gives it to the disciples to give to the people. So the first time I read that, I skipped right over it. But as I read it 3 to 4 more times, this hit me. Jesus could have handed the food directly to the people, right? They're sitting right there in front of him. He's got them all gathered on the grass. So he could have just handed it to them. But again, he's teaching the disciples through this. So he gives them the honor of providing the food to the crowd. And again, that's the character of Jesus. He wants to do this with us. He doesn't need us, but he enjoys working with us. I think he really likes it. So he provides us with resources. 2 fish, right? Ultimately, those 2 fish and that bread came from God in some capacity. So he provides us with that, and then he lets us be the one to use them to bless others. Like, so unnecessary. He doesn't have to do that, but he does that for us. So they hand out this food, and it says that the people ate and were satisfied. And we're not told exactly how it happens. Like, did the food just keep multiplying as they passed it, and they're like, this thing isn't running out, it just keeps going. Or did it multiply in Jesus's hands? Like, did a bunch just like appear in his hands and then he gave it to the disciples? We don't know. But we do know that everyone ate until they were full and that there were leftovers. leftovers for all these people. And God supplied abundantly, not just enough for everyone to have a little snack. It was like abundant. And by the way, it says that there were 5,000 men besides women and children. Like they weren't counting women and children in that number. So there were easily close to probably 10,000 at least that day, if you include women and children. So after they're done eating, Jesus tells them to take up all the leftovers and like collect them. And it filled 12 baskets full. Large baskets, I think, but even if they were smaller, that's still a lot of leftovers. And I think Jesus did this because he wanted them to take what they had been given so generously and go and give to others. And that's what God calls us to do, like to use what he's given us to go and help others. And so in John, it says, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." So in this moment, Jesus, like, he sees that they're like scratching their heads and they're like, oh my gosh, like this is the prophet. Is this the one that Moses was telling us about, that he like prophesied about? And so Jesus knows if he sticks around right now, they're gonna mob, right? They're gonna like use him to start a riot to overthrow the Roman authorities, because they weren't a fan of the current government. So he senses like things are about to get wild. So he bounces out of there. He doesn't want the attention or the applause. He's not going to stick around. He's focused. He's like, I got a job to do. I'm going to continue the work that God has called me to do. So I got to go. No days off, except Sunday, obviously. So that's the end of the story. But I want to end by looking at what the story reveals about God's character, and then just like ask us some questions to think about through this weekend. So this story reveals a lot about God's character. It reveals that he can empathize with our sorrow, right? He knows what it's like to grieve the loss of a friend or family or his son. He knows that pain and he can empathize with us. He's compassionate. Even in the midst of Jesus' suffering, he was compassionate for other people. He's just as concerned with our spiritual hunger and healing as he is with our physical. He wants to partner with us in his work, and he invites us into that even though he doesn't need us. And he's a good father who provides abundantly for us. And so with all that, I've got some questions for us to just think about this weekend. Where in your life are you needing Jesus to provide for you? And are you doubting that he will? So how can we look back on our lives and see where he has worked a miracle? Like look back and see where he has provided and done like the unthinkable in your life before. And can you just hold on to that while you wait for the miracle? Can you hold on to what he has done before and believe, like we heard last weekend, believe that he will do it again? And then what has God given you? Maybe it's only 1 fish and 2 loaves, but he's put something in your hand, right? Maybe it's time. Maybe it is money. Maybe he's blessed you financially or given you a lot of time. Maybe it's a talent or a gift or a passion that he's given you. Will you thank him for what you do have, a lot or little? And then will you trust him with it? Will you hand it over to him and let him use that to bless the 5,000? Like Juliana said a few days ago, God can easily work a miracle, right? With the snap of his fingers, with a word from his mouth, he can do that. But he asks us to join him. And he's going to ask us to act and to participate and to partner with him in what he's doing. So where is he asking you to do that in your life? Where is he asking you to join him and partner with him in what he's doing? So that's all I have today. This has really, truly been a joy to do with you guys. I'm beyond blessed by this study. And we're going to continue looking through the miracles next week. So join us for that. But in the meantime, call us or text us if you need anything or you just want to chat. Somebody please text Cole. He just needs some interaction. So somebody hit him up. All right. We love you guys. We'll see you later.